Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of CARE National. Hope all of you are doing well. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's episode of the Daily Dose. Thank you so much for joining us. We all know that police brutality, anti-Black racism has been on all of our minds over the past several weeks, but for many communities, this has been on our mind for decades. You could say for 400 years, generation after generation after generation. We all know that Atlanta is now the focus of our attention. It was Minneapolis a few weeks ago, and now Atlanta is just the latest example of a case of an African American man being shot dead, killed in an unjust police shooting. So today we want to speak to people on the ground in Atlanta about how the city is dealing with this latest police shooting, what demands are being made to ensure that this does not happen again, and how this is impacting the CARE family, as we're going to discuss. The shooting actually happened literally maybe 2 minutes away from CARE George's office in Atlanta, and just seconds away from Masjid al-Mu'minun, which is a very prominent, important masjid in the city, and also where the CARE Georgia staff goes to worship every day. So this is hit us closely in different ways. So with that, I want to invite on our two guests today, Imam Suleiman Hamid, who is the Imam of Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam, as well as Mortaza Quadri, who is the legal director of CARE Georgia. Let's bring on Imam Suleiman and Mortaza. Assalamu alaikum, Imam. Assalamu alaikum, Mortaza. Can you both hear me okay?
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Edward. Yes.
Mashallah.
Thank you for having me.
Hamza, thank you for joining us. And just so you all know, Imam Suleiman right now is in Sapelo Island, which many of you may know is a historic island off the coast of Georgia. The land was settled and run by freed Black slaves, including a Black Muslim slave who was freed and founded a community there. Imam Suleiman is there right now, so his connection goes in and out a little bit. That's why they've got very limited connection. But alhamdulillah, we appreciate him connecting with us and being with us today to share his thoughts on what's going on. And more to you as well. We thank you for joining us again. We've had to bring you on numerous times to discuss issues happening in Georgia and elsewhere related to police brutality. So we appreciate you making the time to be with us. Mortaza, can you start by telling us about just reviewing briefly, not necessarily even what happened, since we all know what happened, but what is going on the ground in Atlanta in terms of the response to the shooting of Rayshard Brooks, and about the neighborhood, since you work literally a minute away from the shooting.
Right. No, I'll be happy to do that, Edward. And thank you again for having us on the show. It's, again, under unfortunate circumstances. One of the things I would just want to start off with is just talk a little bit about Rayshard Brooks, who he was, because a lot of times we're just hear a name and it becomes a hashtag and we don't know who the person was. So Rayshard Brooks was 27 years old. He was a father of three. It was his 8-year-old daughter's birthday the very next day, and she was waiting in the morning in her birthday dress for him to come pick her up. He's been described as a person who had an infectious smile, was very passionate about his family, cared a lot for his family, and was a really strong worker. That being said, a person doesn't need to be an exceptional person for their lives to matter. Rayshard Brooks was a person whose life had incredible value, just as anyone else's. And what we've seen far too often is, and which is why the Black Lives Matter movement has taken up roots so much recently, is that this is being ignored by large segments of the population. So Rayshard Brooks was, as a brief summary of what happened, is that he was in a Wendy's parking lot right down the street from the CARE office. This is close to the sort of West End neighborhood in the Atlanta university system, or university center, which is right down the street from the CARE office. It's a historic area, and this is a Wendy's that you and I, Edward, we've been to this Wendy's together. We've gone Frosties from this Wendy's. From what we knew, it was predominantly African American run, and there would be people who would be in the need of food who Wendy's employees would usually share food with. So we're very familiar with this neighborhood. Project South, another great civil rights organization, is just down the street from there as well. He was asleep in his car. An officer came to the scene, had a conversation with him where he asked him to move his car into a parking spot. Another officer came. This is Officer Rolfe, actually, who's the second officer on the scene, who's been in the police force for 6 years. He's a 27-year-old but has been in the police force for 6 to 7 years and has 12 prior incidences of police misconduct or complaints against him. Some of them civilian, one of them being of use of force, and then 5 vehicular accidents within a 6-year period, which if it was you and I, we would know what the repercussions of that would be. But because of a lack of accountability against police departments and police officers, this officer has been able to get away scot-free on a lot of these. So Rayshard was asked to come out. He was cooperated with police. He was talking with them. We see the full video where he's cooperating with them. He's having friendly conversations with them. And the police officers at first, we even see in their dash cam, they're saying, do we even want to deal with this guy? That, it's not anything serious. But eventually they make the decision to arrest him. Rayshard, being drunk and under the influence of alcohol, did not act in a logical way, in which an officer should understand if someone is drunk, they're not going to act in a logical way. So he resisted arrest. He was wrestled down to the ground, and then he runs away with a taser in his hand, one of the officer's tasers. So he's running away from the police, and he shot 3 times, or he shot twice. They fired 3 times at him. He shot twice, and he's pronounced dead later on. So he was called on. The police were called because he was napping in his car. A man who was too drunk to drive was napping in his car. I'm going to let Imam Suleiman talk about this. This could have been avoided. His death could very easily have been avoided if we had these community resources in place to address this. And what I would like to stress is, again, we see this escalation. The fact that someone escalated a man parked in his car, sleeping and taking a nap, to calling the police. The police coming and then calling another officer is another escalation. Then taking a breathalyzer when you could easily ask this man, and Rayshard asked the police to let him go home. He could walk to his sister's house, which is down the street. And again, they refused. There was constant stages of escalation. And then, which at the end resulted in his death by them shooting him 3 times. On the ground, the response was immediate. The people of Atlanta came out in the streets the very next day. We had been protesting for days on the issue of police brutality, with the George Floyd shooting, with the Ahmaud Arbery case, with the Yasin Muhammad case. People in Georgia were already mobilized, and when they saw this, they came out immediately. They did something which is very rare for Atlanta. Atlanta Police Department are very hesitant to let protesters onto the highway. It's only happened once in my memory, in my lifetime, that protesters have ever made it out into the highway, and for that time, it was about a 10-15 minute period. Protesters shut down I-85 immediately south of the Capitol, which is towards the airport, for a good hour or two, which is unprecedented action, demanding justice, demanding action. The civil rights groups on the ground have taken this opportunity to push for radical change. CARE Georgia is, as part of CARE National, we're still developing our position on alternatives to policing, including community resources, as well as a variety of other things. But the groups on the ground, the Southern Center for Human Rights, Project South, the NAACP of Georgia, are calling for the defunding and the eventual dismantling of the Atlanta Police Department, because they say it's inherently racist, and the anti-Blackness that stems from it endangers the populations it's meant to protect. Atlanta is known to be one of the most militarized police. It's the most heavily surveilled city in all of America. And these are things that a lot of people tied to our involvement in law enforcement exchange, GILEE program, Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, where our local law enforcement are trained in militarized police tactics by either the law enforcement or the militaries of foreign countries, many of whom have foreign rights or human rights violations. So there has been this mobilization to very radical and very strong ask to defund the police by civil rights groups here and invest that money into community resources. So I'm proud that the community has come out and has spoken, and they're still speaking out today. There was a march on Monday led by the NAACP, and they said that they will be out and they will take over the Capitol every single day until demands are met. So the people have been mobilized and the people are calling for justice.
Thank you for that kind of review of how things are going on the ground there, we appreciate that. Imam Suleiman, let me first just ask you, what are your thoughts as an imam, as a community leader? Just, what's your reaction to what is going on, not only in Atlanta, but in many other places around the country? Just what do you want to share? Before I even ask you specific questions, what's on your mind? What do you want to share with us?
Bismillah. Again, thank you, Brother Edward and Karen, for hosting this call. You know, the thing for me, the challenge was watching another murder on television, and that secondary trauma that I'm sure that people think, you know, Americans and as Westerners, we may not really realize when we watch these movies and the guys have guns and it's just been normalized. But this is even more personal level, and we're watching it from the police.
It looks like we may have lost Imam Suleiman. As I mentioned, everyone, he's on Sapelo Island right now, the historic island community that was founded. Oh, we've got him back. So his connection might go in and out. But Imam Suleiman, you back?
Yes. I said, I'm just concerned about what is this actually doing to the hearts and minds of the people. So wanting people to actually make sure that they're taking time to decompress and not just sit there and watch this stuff all the time. That's my concern. You know, how is this actually affecting people? I look at my children, you know, when I'm watching news and I see them, you know, you see how their attention takes to the screen. We were at a rally yesterday with our county commissioner. My children, I asked my children, did you all want to come? You know, I had to go do a prayer. And I could see their hesitance, and me and my wife were able to go out and say, "What are you? You know, what is it?" They say, "We're scared." You know, they riot and these.
I think we lost Imam Suleiman again, Hamza. But I could hopefully you all heard most of what he was saying, and I think what he was emphasizing is that, you know, the issue is not just anti-Black racism and the people whose lives are lost in these shootings, but how this is impacting young people, especially young African Americans in these cities who are seeing this news day in and day out, and are now in some cases afraid to go out. I saw a video earlier today on some social media outlet that showed a young Black kid in a driveway at his home playing basketball by himself. And in the video, you see him suddenly go and hide behind a car in his driveway. And then you see a police car come driving by his house and going off in the distance. And his automatic reaction to the sight, to the noise of a police car coming, was to hide, even though he hadn't done anything personally. He was just outside playing basketball. In fact, Ion, if I know Ion, our producer, if you're there, if you get a chance to find that video, I think it just came out today, I'd love to show that to the audience because it's just so telling about the impact this is having on young people. Imam Suleiman, it looks like you're back. You want to share one more thought with us? We lost the connection again, but Hamza, we are so happy to have you that anything you can share, we're happy to hear it. And we'll wait for Imam Suleiman to get the connection sorted out. Mortaza, can you tell us, number one, it looks like the officer who opened fire has not been charged yet. Fulton County DA Howard indicates that may be coming soon. Can you talk about, you know, the issue that we're having with how long it takes for the Fulton County District Attorney's Office to make decisions in these shooting cases? If you think about Jimmy Atchison, Shukri Ali Saeed, the DA has moved very quickly on this case and on the case of the AUC students who were tased a few weeks ago. But there are other open police shooting cases. Is that right? That still have not been resolved. What do you make of that?
I think it's DA Howard's desire to have some political capital or to have some political clout. Obviously, he just lost an election that he was trying to garner support for. Right now, politically, because of the people that have come out in the civil unrest and the protesters, the people have shown that they have power, and institutions that may not have been as quick to act in the past have now decided that it's in their best political interest to act. Regardless of whether or not they're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do, what this does show is that the people have power. And I can say this outright. I've lobbied at the state capitol, and we've seen more for the last 3-4 sessions. We've seen more happen in the last 2 weeks in terms of police reform, in terms of alternatives to policing, and investing in community resources and addressing anti-Black racism than we have in the last 3 or 4 sessions in the Georgia legislature. Legally, it does obviously take some time for a lot of these cases to progress. A lot of that is based on, unless you're Black in America, where there's this precedence that innocent before guilty, right? the victims of these shootings didn't face that, didn't get to enjoy that privilege, or didn't get to enjoy that principle. But a lot of times these officers do. And there's a lot of steps that protect officers and protect them from being held accountable. And those are some of the very real things that CARE Georgia and a lot of our coalition partners are trying to address.
Right. And one of these issues that we're having is not only the issue of qualified immunity, which is an issue that you run into when it even gets far enough for a civil lawsuit against police officers, but we're talking about the issue of not even getting them charged in the first place. And so we've seen that with Shukri Ali, we've seen that with Jimmy Atchison, we've seen that with so many others. And now what you're finding is that in a case where there's a viral video, then all of a sudden you get prosecutors moving very quickly. But even in the Ahmaud Arbery case, we recall the prosecutors filed charges not after they got the video, but after the video went public, right? Because they'd had the video for some length of time. They knew for some amount of time exactly what had happened to Ahmaud Arbery. But when that video went public is all of a sudden when swift action happened. It shouldn't have to be that way. We're all familiar, everyone's heard, I assume, that there's a Justice and Policing Act that is currently under consideration at the national level. Mortis, I don't know if you've studied this in detail, but can you, if so, can you tell us a little bit about, what's in that act, some of the positive things, some of the things that are lacking? I know there's some discussion of the issue of chokeholds, of databases on misconduct, things of that nature. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I have, I can go into a little bit of it. I don't know it as well in detail, so you might be able to have to fill us in on a couple things, but I know that it's working on a lot of the things that have, a lot of the issues that plague police departments is either their militarization or their use of force. So this Justice and Policing Act addresses a lot of those policies, some things like banning chokeholds or banning different types of maneuvers that you hold someone down for, as well as creating a use of force database that has to be shared. So when there are these incidents of police use of force, they will follow a police officer. It doesn't just go off his record, as well as holding them accountable so that they're moving towards a system that holds them accountable. The issue with this, though, is that a lot of this Justice and Policing Act, the biggest issue is that it's funneling even more money into police departments as opposed to taking money away. The opponents of this say that a lot of these programs, a lot of these trainings are actually putting more money into these police departments as opposed to defunding. And I think even in its purpose, it says it intends to defund to a degree, but the practical application is if you're having these types of trainings, if you're having these new programs put in place, you're putting in more money, which could be reinvested into community resources that are community-led and driven.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is that this issue of a national misconduct database, right now as we speak, there is an FBI database for use of force incidents, but it's completely voluntary. Law enforcement agencies don't have to submit data on their use of force incidents to this national database, which was established in 2017 in a pilot program and then went fully live in 2019. So most don't submit to it, and therefore the statistics in it are undoubtedly undercounted and incomplete, much like the voluntary hate crime reporting data. And the Justice and Policing Act, to my understanding, would create a database of misconduct, but not necessarily just use of force. And what would be great about a database that ties federal funding to use of force reporting is that you would then get an idea of what kind of force is being used, whether or not it's described as misconduct, Black versus white people being and others being victimized by it, the racial identity of the perpetrators, what cities is happening most in. It could really give you some good official numbers. And right now, journalists try to put these numbers together. Some scholars do, some community groups do, but there's no one single official government recognized database that collects and collates all the use of force data from around the country. So even the Justice and Policing Act would not do that. And so that's something that could be very helpful. And look, it's 3:25. We lost Imam Suleiman, as I mentioned. He's on a historic island, Sapelo Island, which we encourage everyone to read about, by the way. That's a whole nother issue of injustice, the way the community there, Black community there, is being treated and being denied proper services. But that's a different show for a different time. Mortaza, as we wrap up the program, I want to ask you, that neighborhood that we work in, that we worship in. I've been there for 10 years. From the time I was an intern to my first job at the city, and then obviously working with CARE. You talked about the people who are going out and putting themselves in the line to protest. They blocked the interstate. There was obviously a police crackdown, but now Mayor Bottoms is saying that she's going to adopt some policing reform. She's announced stricter use of force rules. What are some of the things that, if we assume that we won't be going as far as dismantling the Atlanta Police Department anytime soon, what are some of the concrete things that can be done in the short term to radically change the way that we are policing in the city of Atlanta?
I appreciate that question, that opportunity, because this is actually a letter we're sending out to the mayor shortly. There's quite a few things. And the main gist of it is, and I'm going to go into specifics too, but investing resources, investing the budget in the city of Atlanta into these communities and into community programs. Creating task force. So if there is an incident of someone being suspected of a DUI or of a drunken misconduct, then there's a task force addressed specific towards alcoholism or addressing someone who is under the influence of alcohol, as opposed to bringing an armed officer. We want to limit the amount of armed officers on the street, dramatically decrease the number of armed officers on the street. We also want to demilitarize the Atlanta Police Department. If you look at the vehicles that we use, if you look at the weapons that we use, these are military grade. This is military grade weapons. This is things people use in war.
Occupy cities, not to serve and protect cities.
Right, and these are things we want to take away from the Atlanta Police Department, their use of it and also their hoarding of it. Beyond just that, we also want to see the end of the city of Atlanta's participation in GILEE, which is the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, where we learn, again, militarized practices from militaries of countries with poor human rights records. We don't need to send our officers abroad to learn how to police our cities. These departments, if they exist, need to be community driven, and they need to represent the communities they're a part of. And then the greatest thing, I think the most important thing in terms of our police reforms, is as we're exploring whether we navigate a space of police alternatives and getting rid of the police department, we need to hold these institutions accountable for their misdeeds and their aggressions and their abuses of power. One way to do that is when we do have a use of force case, instead of sending it to the Fulton County DA's office, the state attorney general's office needs to oversee the investigation. There's this, again, this difference in proximity and scope where there's separation. There's not a personal tie with the officers involved in the shooting when it's the state, as opposed to the very county that officer works in. We also want to see this control of police unions. Police unions to the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, one of their spokesmen said today that the city acted far too quickly with this in firing this officer, and his due process was violated. This is, it's ridiculous. You see someone killed on camera, shot in the back, 3 shots fired at him, and you have someone still defending this action. Police unions do far too much to protect police officers from being held accountable. Qualified immunity, as a host of other things that are protecting police officers and allowing them to act in ways that an ordinary citizen in their normal conduct would not be able to do. And while police officers are in danger at times and are putting themselves in danger, a pizza driver statistically is more likely to be killed on the job than a police officer. So we need to be clear about the amount of danger they're putting themselves in as well. A pizza delivery driver doesn't have those protections that we're giving police officers, and their job is more dangerous. So there's a host of things, and we're going to be putting a statement out within the next couple of days with a whole list of demands. They're geared towards protecting civilians, holding police officers accountable, and also severely restricting their use of force, if ever allowing for their use of force. I think those are the most important demands that we can ask for. Edward, I don't mean to turn this around, but I think there's something you brought up earlier that I think our viewers would really appreciate. Is you talked about the impact this has on Black kids and Black children growing up. As a father, when you see this, what do you think about? What are the lessons you think about that you're going to have to share with your child when he grows up, inshallah?
Well, it's strange. My son is very young. He's 8 months old, and so this is something that obviously does not impact him yet. But you really start to worry if you think about the trajectory this country is going. And I don't just mean nationally with President Trump, and I don't even really mean with police brutality, which is probably isn't even getting worse. It's just being filmed more often than it was, but just the unrest, the fighting, the political polarization, it really makes you wonder what kind of country kids would grow up in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think I'm not as worried about his future as trying to figure out what are we going to do right now to make sure that this is a country that he can grow up in and that we don't have to jump off the Titanic. So to speak. So, inshallah, my hope is that let's do what we all can to make this a better country for our children, so that they can grow up in a different environment, so they're not having to turn on their TV and see people being shot in the back twice, and experiencing other forms of injustice. So inshallah, that's kind of my perspective on it. And the last thing I want to share before we close up is earlier I mentioned this video of a young boy playing basketball and the reaction he had to a police car driving by. I want to show that briefly to wrap up the program, because I think it dovetails perfectly what Imam Suleiman was discussing. So I'm going to share this now. Hold on one moment. Mortaza, can you see the video?
I don't see the video. I see it says screen sharing right now. It's a black screen.
Hold on. Let's try this again.
Okay, I see it now.
You see it? Okay, hold on.
Or it went away now, but I saw it for a moment. I don't think you're screen sharing anymore.
Okay, hold on. Let's try this again. All right, can you see it now?
Yes, it's there.
All right. So everyone just watch this video. That's the human impact of everything we're seeing. It does not only impact the people who are killed or their families. It has a very immediate, not even a trickle down effect, a very immediate effect on young Black men and women and others around the country. So, Mortaza, thank you for the work you're doing. Imam Suleiman, we're so sorry we weren't able to maintain the connection. We hope to have Imam Suleiman, the leader of Atlanta Mosque of Al-Islam, the oldest mosque in the state of Georgia, African-American led community. Hope to have him back very soon, inshallah. Thank you all for watching today's episode of The Daily Dose. We hope to see you again soon. Please stay safe, and inshallah, talk to you tomorrow, 3 o'clock for the next episode of The Daily Dose. Assalamu alaikum. May peace